Hey there, leader. I know how overwhelming leadership can be. I mean, trust me, I've been there. But my goal is pretty simple. I want to help you thrive. I want to help you find that sweet harmony between your professional drive and your personal life. And on my podcast, I love diving into the headaches of leadership and sharing real actionable solutions that'll help you not just survive, but thrive. And we talk about how to rise professionally without sacrificing your family life. And I even get pretty real about stories of struggle and triumph on finding harmony between both worlds. And I am beyond grateful that you are tuning into the podcast and following and engaging on social media and working on your personal growth. But did you know I'd love to walk alongside you personally on your leadership journey? I don't just preach personal development, I live it out. And that's why I'm super excited to share that I'm now a member of the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. This means I can bring you the teachings of John C. Maxwell. Yes, the John C. Maxwell, the country's #1 leadership authority. Now, this certification just isn't about me leveling up. It's about showing you that I'm committed to delivering the very best guidance for you and your team. And if you're ready to transform your leadership, hop on over to leadershipontherocks.com and click that schedule a call button. Whether it's personal development, company wide training, or going through change management, let's connect and start your journey of success together. Again, that's leadershipontherocks.com. Let's thrive together.
And that's when I knew that was the beginning of the end of my corporate career. Like, even if I had made a move, it would have just been the same story with a different shade of lipstick. And I didn't want to do that. And so I like to make big changes. I never outgrew taking risks. And so within about 6 months of that moment, I cashed out of Wall Street, moved to a tropical island off the coast of Belize in Central America, and started this business.
This is the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, where we equip and empower leaders like you to thrive in and create harmony between your professional and personal lives. I'm your host, Bethany Reese, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking with author and CEO Tammy Alvarez about how to level up so we can make a big impact and never hate Mondays again. Tammy Alvarez is the CEO of Career Winner Circle. She is also an author of Escaping the Career Trap, professional keynote speaker, inspirational coach, and former corporate executive. Her spirited break all the rules approach blends C-suite experience with a pragmatic, results-based coaching style that helps business professionals create a big impact and love every Monday again. Welcome to the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, Tammy. I'm so happy to have you.
Bethany, thank you so much. I am excited to be here, and I know we have got an amazing conversation ahead today. I'm so excited.
Oh, me too, me too. And I got to start with your background because your background is C-suite executive on Wall Street, banking, all the things. And I can't even imagine, air quote, all the things that you have probably seen in leadership. During your 25 careers in corporate, you've always kind of considered yourself an underdog, and yet you've had absolutely amazing success. So now as a leadership coach, you're helping people level up in their leadership. So I just want to start out with, can you share with us your journey as an underdog and how you've leveled up to find success in leadership?
Absolutely. And it's an interesting story. It's a little different than everyone else's. And I think everybody has a unique story. But I am living proof that success is not linear by a long shot.
I love that.
And I didn't come through the ranks like everyone else. When I was 15, my parents had separated. Okay, that's not uncommon. But what happened is my dad ended up disappearing. My mother got pregnant with me in high school. And so she never graduated high school. She took care of my sister and I and helped my dad with his business. Long story short, very shortly after they split, we were homeless.
Oh my goodness.
And at 15 years old, I saw how much my mom struggled. And I just had this amazing fire that came from that moment, realizing that I never wanted to end up in that circumstance. And that I was the only one that I could count on to make sure that that never happened. And so all of my ambition and all of my drive was fear-based, quite frankly. It wasn't all this, I can move mountains. It's like, I don't want to end up homeless again, because that really was not fun. So I never went to college. I didn't get my degree until I was 40.
Oh,
So I started working right out of high school and was very fortunate to have an amazing mentor that saw more in me than I did. And because I felt like I had nothing to lose, because I didn't know how to be afraid of anything. Because as long as I wasn't homeless, as long as I wasn't a waitress, as long as I wasn't the data entry operator, I was far outpacing anything I ever thought possible. So I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, right? Country town, more cows than people. And so as he kept putting me in these situations, and I just kept making mistakes, fixing them, and moving on. And so that early part of my career was highly informative. Now, fast forward 20 years later, where I'm leading a team of 2,000 people across 35 countries in financial services, dealing with some of the biggest crises that the world has seen. And so that journey obviously was not one step up after another. I've been fired twice. I've changed roles 11 times. I had 5 different industries. And I always, with my ambition, I always had that feeling that if you don't like it, change it. And
Mm-hmm.
because I had the imposter syndrome, Bethany, before it was a thing. Because here I am, small country girl in these meetings, usually the only woman, always the youngest member of the leadership team table, no college degree, no passport. I had never left the country. And here I am trying to play big, right? And show up like more than I am. So, from a leadership style perspective, I couldn't do it like everyone else. I had to find a different way through trial and error. But that's ultimately what created my edge. I always thought that because I was different, that was my Achilles heel. And I learned it too late in my career that that was actually my superpower.
Mm-hmm. Man, I gotta know, when's the movie gonna come out on your life?
Yeah, I know
That
the
sounded
trailer.
that sounded completely like a movie that I want to watch.
Oh, it was interesting living it, that's for sure, right? And now, so fast forward while we're here today, about 6 years ago, I was a managing director for one of the largest firms on Wall Street. And I had always loved my career, always. And if I didn't love it, I changed it. And what I found as part of my success was that I found something to be passionate about. Like I find people spending a lot of time trying to find their passion versus like, what's in front of you and what can you really lean into? And for me, it was about my team. Like, could I be passionate about my team? If I couldn't be passionate about that, could I be passionate about the work I was doing? Because let's face it, financial services isn't actually that interesting, right? So, but could I be passionate about the work? And if not, then could I be passionate about my personal growth? And when none of those would work, then it was time to make that move. So I was sitting here, I remember having this moment where, it was this out of body experience. We had missed earnings again. The boardroom was full of executives just waiting to just get reamed out. And so we're just waiting. And the executive walks in, like just out of his ever-loving mind. And he just starts ranting. And this happens every quarter, so this wasn't new. But usually what
Mhm.
we would do, and it almost became a sport, is like the first one would be like, it wasn't my department's fault. It wasn't, it was them. And then this volleyball goes on the blame game. This is really what happens behind closed doors, guys. So just for you,
Oh
listen,
yeah.
this is the craziness that goes on. And I'm usually part of that and would defend my team and all that stuff. And this time I just didn't. I just didn't care. And I felt like I had this out of body experience, like you see in the movies, where you're kind of hovering above the situation, but you're not really part of it. And that's when I knew that was the beginning of the end of my corporate career. Like, even if I had made a move, it would have just been the same story with a different shade of lipstick. And I didn't
Mm.
want to do that. And so I like to make big changes. I never outgrew taking risks. And so within about 6 months of that moment, I cashed out of Wall Street, moved to a tropical island off the coast of Belize in Central America, and started this business. And today we're in Mexico City, so we've changed countries again about a year ago. And this is where I have the opportunity to really help individuals find their leadership path and just get so excited from their wins and their victories and all that kind of fun stuff. So that's how that movie at least ends so far.
Man, I'm telling you, I can just visualize it in my head. Like sitting in that movie, I hear the monologue that's happening and the music that's building up and swelling, and then you just taking your things and walking out of that building like, yeah, maybe an explosion behind you. I don't know. And
Well,
then
I hope
going
that
and
didn't
starting
do
a
too
new
much of
life.
an explosion, right? No
Yeah.
collateral damage, which was good. But yeah, absolutely epic, right? In terms of, and it was so interesting because most of my colleagues and friends, now here I am, at where everybody strives to be, the big title, the fancy office, the fancy
Yeah.
apartment in Manhattan, and all the bells and whistles that go along with that. And when I decided just to pull the plug, I'm like, this no longer serves me. and I need to do something different. Most of my colleagues and friends ask me, why are you giving up?
Mhm.
I was like, are you kidding me? I am doing one of the most terrifying things in my life. Right. I decided to move in permanently with a boyfriend I had dated casually. So, we decided we were going to get our act together, completely become an entrepreneur on my own dime, which I've never done before. Oh, and move to a foreign country while we're at it. I was like, how
Mhm.
in any way is that giving up? But in that mindset of you're always chasing the next thing, you want that corner office. You're supposed to, this is the holy grail. And then when you
Yeah.
get there, you realize this is not for me at all. And I was there for a long time before I grew out of it. But so it's interesting in terms of people's journeys and why we end up where we do.
I find that so fascinating. And I've heard this, from other people that have like made it in their career, whether it was music or movies or, corporate things, is you're striving for this destination. And once you get there, you're like, is this all there is to it? Like, this is not, I'm not happy. I'm not full of joy. And they find that, that's not where your joy and your happiness comes from, is in those things, in the title and the position, the power or the status or whatever. And I love the movie that you portrayed that well, to you, it's your life. But to us, we're like living that. And you've never been stuck. Whenever you feel stuck or feel like, things are going your way, you are so brave to change it. And so now you're turning around and helping other leaders level up, right? And I can't help, whenever I hear that word level up, I immediately, and I'm going to date myself here, I think of Super Mario Brothers, right? I'm playing the Nintendo and I'm trying to get to the next level. I've got all these challenges. I'm trying to jump on that flag to move on to save the princess. But there's certain levels where you just feel stuck and you can't get past, I don't know, the arm that's on fire or the things that are throwing fire at you or whatever. Imagine whatever video game you want to play, but you feel stuck. And that's in a video game, but we can feel that way in our real lives. And so for those of us listening that feel stuck in our career level, like my poor Mario player, how can we learn the skills that we need to take that risk, like you were talking about, so that we can level up and move forward in our career and leadership, even if that means going somewhere else? Talk
Yeah.
to us. How do we get unstuck?
And it doesn't always mean going somewhere else, right? But it can. And I think we need to give ourselves the grace to decide that in terms of, I believe we've got seasonality in our careers. And when we acknowledge that and give ourselves grace for that, then we're able to really live in that full level of fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
Careers, especially for Americans, right, identify so much with who you are as a person. I remember whenever I go to a cocktail party, the very first thing you'd ask is, what do you do? Who do you work for? What's your title? You're immediately trying to size people up to see where they fit. And then when I left America, I'm like, no one talks about this. This is weird. Now I got nothing to talk about, especially when I cashed out, right? I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to talk about now. And so really understanding where your seasonality is. Like when I was single, I took big risks. When I was new in my marriage, I took big risks. When I had my daughter, my husband was a stay-at-home dad. So I was the breadwinner. And so I really had to like throttle back a little bit. That didn't mean I
Mm-hmm.
didn't continue to grow. And then after she was off the payroll, then I took a really, graduating college, I took a really big risk and moved to a foreign country and started this business. So I think step one to really being clear on what when you want to level up is why. And is now the
Yes.
right time? Because if it's not, so for example, I knew that I could not take an expat assignment in Hong Kong when my daughter was 3.
Yeah.
Like I knew that was just not an option. But how can I continue to grow? How can I continue to be ready for that global role when the time comes? And so many people believe that growth comes through promotion. And it actually, there's so many things you can learn through making lateral moves, through starting, working in a different business unit within your company, taking on
Mm-hmm.
extra projects that aren't in your wheelhouse, but that need your area of expertise for a small piece of it so you can learn more. So I think step one about how you level up is to get really clear on where you are in that season and why do you want what you want? Is it
Mm-hmm.
because your neighbor has the Range Rover and you want one too? Or is it because this is really something that you feel called and compelled to do? So that's step one. I think
That is
another,
so good.
yeah, take a breath for a second, right? Because we don't take that time. We just go and do and do. And I work with a lot of senior executives and mid-level leaders. And my first question is why?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, that's the next thing. Or the one that's doing it now is terrible at it. I'm like, both of those are true, but why? Right? Why for you? And when that answer rings true in terms of purpose and drive and fulfillment, then you know that that's your time to go.
Mhm.
The second thing in terms of leveling up that I think is really important is becoming that leader that people choose to follow.
Yes.
Most of that comes from transparency, vulnerability, and the ability to fail successfully. And
Whoa.
these are
You
the
got to say that again. The beauty to fail. What? Say that one
success.
more time.
Yes. So it's vulnerability, transparency, and the ability to fail successfully.
Mm.
These are the three Achilles heels I see almost every leader face, right? We want to pretend we have all the answers. But guess what? Everyone knows you don't. So stop trying to pretend, right? It just doesn't work. And I was never the smartest person in the room, right? And with my upbringing and lack of education, not getting my degree till I was 40, that's not a big surprise. I had skills that other people didn't. But one of my biggest things, for example, in terms of vulnerability, that took me a long time to understand is I'm terrible at math. I just am. I don't believe letters and numbers should be together. I don't think it's natural. I love people
Amen.
who
Amen.
I love people who do. That makes
Yeah.
technology and science and all those things, but I am not that girl.
Uh-huh.
And so I tried to hide it. And what would happen is when we were in these metrics meetings, or if we were like, I run a P&L, like I know how to use numbers, right? That was my fear base, was not ever being homeless again. So I know how to run a P&L, but in terms of metrics and basic algebra and things like that, like no, absolutely
Mhm.
lights on, nobody's home. And so when I was pretending I didn't know or I knew, then in those meetings though, I was not able to keep up when people are extrapolating data into the future or saying, because this is like this, well, of course we should do that. Like my spidey senses were saying that's not right. But I had nothing to back it up and I was afraid of asking a stupid question. And I'm pretty sure if I had it in my mouth, it would have been. And so what I finally realized, again, a little late, but learn from me so you can move faster, is that when I finally admitted out loud what everyone knew, is that this is not my jam. I can get people inspired. I can set a
Mhm.
strategy. I can get people to run into that burning building. But if you're going to ask me to figure out the square root of anything, this is not my thing. And so what my team did, I ended up surrounding myself with people who were really good at this, and I wasn't. I had quants and data analysts and data scientists and all these people that would help me understand the data before the big meeting. So I could ask my dumb questions, I could do what I need to do, and then go in and actually test and challenge like the leader I was known to be. And so I think
Mhm.
being vulnerable and admitting the things that you're not good at help you reach out to those where that is their superpower. They become part of the solution. They get excited about whatever it is you're working on instead of worrying about cleaning up your mess when you're done.
Mhm.
So, that's something to think about in terms of being vulnerable.
Absolutely. And I think about the humility that goes with that. So often pride and arrogance of, I've got this in my own power versus the humility of saying, I don't have it all and I need help and working together through that collaboration as a team. I think you're just debunking right here one of the biggest fears of leadership, like what you said, is the fear that I have to know everything about everything. And that's just a facade. Leaders, listen to everything Tammy is saying. You do not have to know everything about everything. That's why you have a team.
And especially I think there's two big moments in someone's career where this shift and this level of
Mm.
vulnerability is equally as important as it is difficult.
Mm.
The first time you step into management and the first time you become a manager of managers. Those are the two biggest moments where you like, I would never admit I didn't know anything. I was always taking jobs I had no idea what was doing. I didn't know, and I'm like, oh, fake it till you make it. And there's an extent where you have to demonstrate confidence and clarity and vision.
Mhm.
But when it comes to the tactics and stuff like that, it's okay to say, I don't know. Because why is it the day after you're promoted, you're expected to be significantly smarter than the day before the announcement went out?
I
It makes
love that.
it makes no sense, right?
So
And
true.
the first time you step into leadership, it's like, oh, and most of the time you're leading your peers. So how awkward is that? And so getting through that with vulnerability is like, hey, we all have a role to play on the field.
Mhm.
Um, you know, whether it's pick any sport, but one position can't win the game.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a coach and there's people who do it. And sometimes the people who do it become coaches. And so when you take that coaching mentality and you don't take that, I'm the boss now, so I get to make all the rules and do all the things, now you become a leader people choose to follow. And that first step into leadership becomes a lot less painful for you and those you manage. Now, when you
Mhm.
move into that manager of manager piece, then the challenge there is you are leading work you have never done before. So now you got to trust. You gotta, know how to lead people who are doing things that you can't dig in and double check or help if they get
Mhm.
behind or anything like that. So your entire leadership style needs to change. And so that's another big vulnerability moment in terms of, I don't know what you do, but you are the best that we have in this organization that does that. And I trust you to help us make the right decisions. Then your job becomes asking the right questions, not having all the answers.
Mhm.
And that's another big shift. So I think, that first piece of vulnerability is super critical. From a transparency perspective, most leaders fail at this, even at the most senior levels. We forget that people can't read our minds. We forget that what we say isn't clear to everyone we speak to.
And
And
that's advice for work and for family. Let me just throw that out there.
this is life lessons, right? So these are absolutely, life lessons applied. And so I think the more communicative you can be, the more you proactively are asking for negative feedback. Like I used to call it, because the other issue is the higher up you get, the less honest people are with you. I mean, they don't mean to
Mhm.
be dishonest, but they're not going to say, like, they'll tell their manager, there's no way this project is getting done. And by the time it got to me, like, well, our risks are managed. We should be okay. We're a strong yellow. And I'm like, what's really going on?
Mhm.
Or I'd have a strategy idea, right? And I think this was the best idea ever. And then, people nod and say, yeah, this is great. But my vibes were saying, I don't think they believe me. And so I would literally have meetings where I called it, tell me how my baby is ugly. Because you are not going to tell somebody your baby's ugly. And when you say, oh, I
Mhm.
want feedback, tell me what, they're not going to do it. But when the only reason for the meeting is to poke holes, find risks, and think of better, different, solutions to what's on the table, and that's the only purpose of the meeting, then that creates a safe space. And so, from a transparency perspective, don't buy your own propaganda, right?
Mhm.
And actively seek people to help you get better because they
It's so
won't do
true.
it naturally because it's not a safe space. No matter how, like, I'm always like super approachable, but your title, the fact that you own someone's bonus, promotion, all that gets in the way.
Mhm.
It's human nature.
You are so on point. And think about the intentionality that you are leading with there. Number one, you're leading with humility of saying, okay, I know that other people have different and some even have more specialized skills than I do, and yet I am the boss over them. But you know how to lean into that. And that takes humility and that vulnerability you were talking about. But now, oh my gosh, the intentionality of saying, hey, we need clear, honest feedback if we're going to make a difference. And I love everything that you're saying. So keep going with it. Keep rolling, sister.
So the last thing is failing successfully. Right? And we all have this fear of failure. No one wants
Mhm.
to look like, a failure. No one wants to have egg on their face and lose credibility and all of those things. And let's face it, right? Today's corporate environment, a lot of the culture is for me to win, somebody else has to lose.
Yeah.
And you don't want to give them that opportunity, right? It's like sharks in the water, right? They see
Yeah.
blood, they start to circle and all that kind of fun stuff. And so, but there's a few points that I want to make for the leaders who are watching and listening. The first one is you cannot succeed without having failed. And so if you are
Mhm.
preventing failure, you are avoiding success. So think about that. And the way that you fail successfully is by taking on an experimental mindset. Too often, and this kind of goes back to the vulnerability and the transparency, but too often we're like, okay, this is the direction, we're going to take the hill and we're going to go do this. And yet there's no chance to like take a different hill
Yeah.
or maybe to take a pit stop on the way up because it's really hard or whatever. And so by adopting an experimental mindset, you move into instead of black, white, yes, no, right, wrong, you move into more of a like, what does this button do? Push it.
I love that.
And when you do that in a transparent way, in a vulnerable way, then everybody knows that, listen, first of all, I don't know that this is exactly right. I think
Mhm.
directionally we're heading the right way. But
Yeah.
here's the reality. A, we're not making decisions with all the information that we have, no matter how hard we try. B, the rate of change in our environment today is faster than it's ever been, and there is no indication that it will slow down. So
Mhm.
even if you made a perfect decision today, under all the circumstances, if there ever is such a thing as perfect, which there's not, but let's say you could and did, 3 months from now, it could be the worst decision ever. Right?
Mhm.
We're in an election cycle. The economy is wonky. You never know who's going to blow up the next country. Like it's crazy out there. So there's
Yeah.
all of these things that are happening while you're marching the hill that if you don't allow yourself the flexibility and the variability to stop, think, and assess, and then reroute the team, then you're always setting yourself up for failure, even with the best idea. So
Mhm.
having that experimental mindset, knowing what success looks like, being clear about it and saying, we're going to check in here. And if X, Y, and Z are true, we're going to keep going. If two of them are, here's what we're going to do. If 2 out of 3 are good, if none of them are good, we're going to bail. And that was always my superpower. I always had a bailout plan before I started saying we're heading in uncertain territory. And so if these success criteria aren't met, we're going to have to find a different way and kill the project. And for those of you listening, those projects that have gone on for years that have been just complete waste of time, but because no one
Mhm.
has the courage to tell the executive, your baby's ugly, and it keeps going. And millions of dollars and millions of hours are being wasted because no one has the courage to say, this is no longer good because we've already spent so much money, right? We've already
Yeah. I call those sacred cows. Nobody's willing to kill the sacred cow.
Yes. And so what I like to if you're brave enough to do is I have a term that I call a third rail project. And so I'm a New Yorker. And in the New York subway system, there are 3 rails. The third rail is the electric one. So if you touch it, you die.
Oh,
So I call
wow.
these the third rail projects because these aren't like the doormat projects that no one wants to do because no one cares. These are systemic issues within an organization that
Mhm.
desperately need to be fixed, but you can't fix them because they're complicated, they're politically a mess, and it's just people have tried before and have failed. Those are the best things to double down on because no one expects you to succeed.
Mhm.
Even if you get it 60% of the way there, you have far surpassed something anyone else has been able to do. And by having that experimental mindset, saying, all right, obviously this is a hot mess because we've not solved for this yet. So let's take a different approach. And you start to be inclusive and vulnerable and transparent, then all of a sudden the entire organization is rallying towards a very experimental mindset. Try this, keep the stuff that worked, get rid of the things that didn't, take another go. And what blows my mind is that in terms of corporations, everyone has adapted to an agile software development methodology. No one
Mhm.
builds software any other way now. But why don't we give ourselves the grace to do that for ourselves? Right? We're
For
still in
sure.
it's so the culture's there. The understanding that iterative movement gets you forward faster in the right direction. But why
Mhm.
can't we do that for ourselves? That's always my big question.
Yeah.
So in terms of like those 3 things, hopefully that gives a little more context in how that works.
Oh, it completely does. And, especially in that last thing, talking about the third rail, what I picture in my mind is most organizations are like that big naval ship. It takes forever to get it to turn in a direction because it's so cumbersome. And what you do need is that speedboat mentality. You've got to be able to go with the flow of the environment to do what you said. But I want to go back to where you were talking about that third rail, the systemic issues, and how, some great leaders really feel called to address root causes, to get down to the heart of the issue and really attack those. But you're going to have these naysayers, right? Just going at you and saying, you can't, how dare you? It'll never work. We'll never succeed. Why even waste your time? And, I think about kind of the work that you do. And I even said it in the intro, you have this spirited break all the rules approach. And I feel like that's what you were just explaining is I know all of you out there are too scared to touch that third rail, but that's where I'm going, to double down on it. So will you talk to us about what you mean by break all the rules approach? I feel like you've already given us a smattering of we're not going to be concerned with everybody else over there. Whenever we see something, this is what we're going to do. So expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, one of the rules that people break is that very first step that we talked about in terms of understanding your seasonality and getting to your why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Because too many of us are in a role that we're supposed to be in, not in a role that we should be in, right? That we feel
Yeah.
drives us. So that's already breaking a rule because you're like, everybody's like, well, why aren't you doing this? Why are you giving up? Right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
story. When it comes with third rail projects, here's a rule that people believe, but I have seen time and time again that is absolutely not true. And that is, if I don't have the hierarchical authority to take on this, then I can't. Now, here's
Mm.
the issue with those third rail systemic projects. No one actually owns it because everyone has a piece of it, and no one has the bravery to say, I'll take this and commit career suicide. Like, no one's going to do that, right? Or if they have, they've already gotten fired. One of my
Yeah.
clients took on a project that 9 people before her got fired over, which took some bravery. And she's the one who actually killed it because it obviously was never going to work. And so when we talk about, breaking that rule, what I have found is in the absence of leadership, people will follow. And so I would, when I took on my third rail projects, that's always how I got promoted, by the way. I would take on a third rail project. They would usually result in reorganizations, and I would
Mhm.
eliminate my boss. I'd fire myself because then there's always a bigger role waiting for me when I was done. So that's, if you want a
Mhm.
promotion, reasonably quickly within your control, this is a great way to do it.
Yeah.
But I would find that, okay, there's one part of my business that was struggling. So it didn't matter whether I was in sales or middle office or in operations or risk, it didn't matter. There was a pain point. And when you looked at that pain point, it got ugly. It grew all these tentacles like spaghetti through the organization. And so you need the collective thought leadership of the organization to fix it. You can't stay in your bubble and make it go
Mhm.
away. But when you realize that, oh, okay, I know I don't actually have the title to do this, but I have the leadership skills, the relationships, and the drive to get this done. And then you start to whisper in people's ear whose lives are as miserable as yours in the different departments. And you're like, how much is this like killing your team, right? It's killing my team too. What can we do about it? And then the two of you are like, oh, hang on a second. We need finance. Let's go talk to the guy in finance. And he's like, this is terrible. Great. Now I got 3 people on our team. Let's go talk to HR and legal and all the things. And so when you start to build this little fiefdom of people who are suffering, whose insights you desperately need, before you know it, you have got this coalition of change makers that are following your lead because everybody's voice is in it, their fingerprints are all over
Mhm.
it, but you're the one that's willing to take the bullet first. But the
Oh,
bullet
that's so
doesn't
good.
come. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what I talk about in terms of breaking the rules is that we're like, oh, it's not my job. I don't want to step on
Yeah.
my boss's toes. I don't want to like seem like I'm trying to land grab. Like we have all these things that we think about, and none of those are actually true. And
Yeah.
so that's a big way to be able to take on those third rail projects and really not only, amplify your career, your relationships, and the impact you're making on the organization, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
impact is the biggest piece.
Yeah.
And the growth that comes from this, because these are hard, right? And these are usually often in addition to your day job. And so, but with that collective strength, everyone like has their place on the field and everyone's playing their positions and the ball is moving fluidly throughout the organization. And when bumps happen, not if, but when, then all of a sudden everybody rallies together. It's like, oh, hang on a second, we're a unified force now. Right. So there
Mhm.
is no blood in the water. The naysayers who chose not to become part of this transformation that are going to be throwing, landmines every chance they get, they no longer have a voice because that movement for change that's so unified
Mhm.
really becomes unbreakable if you do it right.
Absolutely. And I want to step into that word transformation because that is such a big thing in organizations right now is how can we transform and they hire, consultants to come in and show them how to transform, but people never leave their silos. And as you were talking, that's the one thing I heard is be the first one that leaves your silo, that leaves your department to go talk to other people to start the conversation to bring them all together because nobody wants to step out of their, think about the wagon circling in the olden days. Nobody wants to step out of their wagon because you might
Not
get shot,
for
like you
good
were saying.
reason. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's dangerous
But
out there. So there's
it
good
takes
reason for that.
absolutely, but you've got to be brave and step out because if the sink or if the ship is continuing to sink, the airplane, use whatever, metaphor you want for your organization. If it's going down and nobody's going to say anything, then I mean, why? Why continue in that path and that journey? be brave, step out. I love what you're saying. Step out and be the first to say, hey, I'm struggling with this. My team is really struggling with this. How about yours? And then you're going to find people that are going to say, oh, yeah, me too. They just don't want to be the first to say it. So be the first to say it, be the first to step out and make true transformation, not just the plug and play program that everybody tries to do, but their heart's not in it and they stay in their silos anyway. And then they point fingers on why the transformation didn't work.
Well, then you have
It's got to be internal.
adoption, right? And if no one
Oh,
adopts
yeah.
it, it's a waste of time. But I also think that transformation sounds big and scary.
Mm-hmm.
You think about transformation, think about the big things the CEO talks about and those, big initiatives for the company and all that stuff. Whereas transformation can happen in a cubicle, and so I learned how to do these third rail projects by starting small, right? When I was one sales manager out of 50, and, we were having an issue with one of our delivery organizations, I would talk to my peers and I'd be like, is it just me? Like, are we having issues? And we didn't make a big deal out of it. We didn't create a budget for this. We didn't, bring this up to the board or anything like that. We just talked to the delivery organization and we're like, hey, we're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, you're struggling because we don't have the information we need from you guys. If we had X, Y, and Z, then we would do a better job. It's like, oh, well, that's easy. And so just by having that tiny little conversation without making any big deals over anything, there wasn't a PowerPoint deck, there wasn't a management meeting. It was just human beings who wanted to work together and make that better, then everybody improved. And so for those that are not in those massive, epic blockbuster movie situations, this can be done at the individual level, right? This can be
Mm-hmm.
done. And so I don't want people to think like, oh, I've got to wait to get to this level before I can do that, because if you wait, you won't have the skills you need to do that well, right? And
Absolutely.
so by doing it a little bit at a time, so I would encourage everybody today, but it's the one thing that if you just did not have to deal with that issue within your role, that life would be so much better for you personally. And then look at the 360 view around that. What departments are inputs? What departments are outputs? What departments do you have to deliver within? And talk to that ecosystem and see if they're having the same issue, because there's a high probability you or your team are not delivering what they need, but they're not going to say anything. But if
Mm-hmm.
you ask in a non-judgmental way, it's like, hey, we could probably make this better. What can I do to help your end? Here's what I could use on my, oh, wait a minute, we need somebody else. So let's go find that person. But you can start that at the most grassroots, smallest level to make the biggest change.
Can I just say, you have simplified this? I mean, listen, everyone. Tammy is essentially saying, go have a conversation with somebody. Go have a conversation. And that's how you solve problems. And we complicate this so much because we're not willing to just step out and have a conversation.
And
And
Bethany,
uh,
the conversation, not text, not Slack
yeah.
message, speaking to human beings, right? So keep going, but I just wanted to make sure that the conversation piece is
Yes.
so important.
That's so, and this, I could get on a soapbox all day long. You can spend so much effort in writing emails back and forth to each other, or you can have a 2-minute conversation and be done with it and move on. Because there's so much understanding when you have a conversation with tone, with, the way I'm saying it and my inflections. And then if you're seeing someone personally, the body language that goes with that versus in the text that you got to go back and forth to try to get understanding. And half the time, you're still going to have misunderstanding. And I just love everything you said. And I just know so many people that need this, including myself, need to hear this conversation is stop making it so complex, be simple, go have a conversation to solve the problem. And I love all the advice you're giving. So I want to ask you about your book. You have a book out. It's
Yeah.
Escaping the Career Trap.
Hold on.
And, we've talked about
Those of you
leveling up.
watching, here's what the cover looks like. You'll see the golden handcuffs, right? So yes.
Love it. Love it. And so everything we've talked about is like feeling stuck, feeling, we don't know how to go to the next level. How do we solve the problems? We're just stuck. And so you've talked about leveling up. So ultimately, what is escaping the career trap? How do we get out of it?
Right. So first of all, you have to know you're in it. Right. And so,
It's such a great way of simplifying things.
I know, right? Let's make sure we're in the trap before we have to worry about getting out. Or if you're not in it, then okay, how do I never get in there, right? And so how do you know you're in the career trap? A good telltale sign is if on Sunday afternoon around 3 p.m. you start getting that pit in your stomach over just the insanity that you're going to have to navigate the next week.
Mm.
It's you're in the trap. You just are. Because if you are not waking up fired up. First of all, you're not taking your entire weekend for you, your family, and those that you love to recharge. That's an issue we can have another episode on. But that's how you're in it, because one of the other rules that we talk about breaking is that no one actually believes that loving Mondays is a thing. Like, yeah, that doesn't actually happen.
True. We all hate Mondays. It's a social thing. We all hate them.
Why they call it work fun, all these other ridiculouses, right? And that goes on in our head. But the reality is this: if you do not wake up fired up, excited to do what you do, then you need to change it. And most of the time you can change in place. You don't even have to make these big epic moves, but there's just so many different things. But you deserve and need to really step into a career that is fulfilling for you. Because I do believe at the heart of everything, and we do a lot of business consulting on this as well, that business success and career fulfillment are inextricably linked.
Mm.
You cannot have one without the other. Full stop. And so, as a leader, look at your team. How are they responding? Are they, I joking around, like, I watch people kind of walk into buildings and stuff as I'm doing seminars and workshops and stuff. And sometimes it looks like the zombie apocalypse has invaded corporate America. It's like
Yep.
stumbling,
I can see that.
coming up. It's like, what is this? Now we're not looking for pom poms and high school bands, but you gotta love what you do. And so this is a big part of this is why everybody deserves to love Mondays is a big part of what we do. So now that you're in the trap because you don't love Mondays and you're kind of putting up with it, then what we do is we have, three primary areas that we talk about in the book. And the process is called align, disrupt, and thrive.
Mm.
And so here's the secret for you that are in leadership roles for yourself as well as for your team. Where we're missing the boat from an alignment perspective, the book is like not a short book, so I'm just definitely summarizing here. But what we need to focus on and what we don't, I think the big miss here is that we need to align our individual aspirations to the company's biggest goals. Now,
Mm.
notice I didn't say their goals for being promoted or how much money they want to make or their title. But when you can tap into the reason somebody gets out of bed in the morning for life, not just for work, and you can grab a hold of that aspiration and stick that on your company's biggest goals, and you start to do that in mass, companies that do that are seeing a 4 times revenue increase and
Wow.
over a 20% increase in profit margin. Like it's a no-brainer. But it's hard to do that because you can't measure aspiration,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can test somebody on a skill, you can do those things. So aspirations are interesting because the other thing that aspirations are tied to is they're tied to your strengths. Because the things that we find motivating, the things that, give us a sense of purpose, typically are the things that we're really good at. And we don't get to spend a lot of time during our day doing the things that light us up.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could do more of the things that light you up, that you could do for 12 hours a day and end up more energized than when you started, and if everyone could do that, then you're unstoppable. I call it igniting the unstoppable force that's lying dormant within your organization, because it is there. You just have to find it. It's there. And so with this talent shortage that's really hitting middle market and the disruption and the dysfunction of the employer-employee relationship and how it's just getting worse, this is the solution. So align is number one. Disrupt is number two, which is my favorite because I'm a rule breaker. And so that's doing all the things differently that we talked about, right? So this is being vulnerable and transparent and, having that experimental mindset and making it a fail-safe environment and all these buzzwords that no one actually knows how to do. But, we just talked about some very specific tactics on how to start to create that, not just for yourself, but for those around you. And then when we talk about thriving, then that ultimately is where you start to pave the way forward. It's where you help others get there too once you've gotten there. Now, don't just keep it to yourself. Like, show others how to do this too. Be that beacon within the organization. Be the team everyone wants to work on, right? Some of us are in a really big corporate environment and the culture is not great. But you can always create what I call a culture bubble, right? You can isolate your team from a lot of the insanity that's going on and the negativity and all the backfighting and the politics and all that stuff, and do good work. And then all of a sudden people are like knocking on the door. It's like, hey, got any openings? Can I come?
Uh-huh.
And those are the right people that you want, by the way. So the book really takes these leaders through a personal journey of being able to go through this. And then ultimately, how do you pave that path for others? Because that's when you start to scale, right? And that's when it starts to really make an
Mhm.
impact for the organization, not just the individual.
I love it. Escaping the career trap. Yeah, guys, you got to get that book, right? If you feel stuck, then learn how to escape it, escape that trap. And so you can actually enjoy Mondays again. I just love it that I mean that just explains so much. How are you feeling about your Monday? That's your assessment. And if it's bad, then you're in a trap. This is how you get out of it.
If you get that Sunday pit in your stomach,
Yeah.
then don't walk
Yeah.
and get.
Love it. And so, Tammy, as we kind of wrap up, what are some key takeaways that our listeners need to grow and apply in leadership? You've shared so much wisdom. So, what are some key takeaways that we need to take?
All right, so let's start from the top, right? So the biggest takeaways are make sure that you're checking into the seasonality of your career and making sure that your next goal, you know why, and that it still is good for you, right? So let's check in with that first. Then we're going to talk about showing up as, as the leader people choose to follow, right? That's through vulnerability, transparency, and failing
Mhm.
successfully. And then the last piece is really starting to lead with those skills in an impactful way within the organization, but taking on those third rail projects, right? When they're no matter how big, how small, but those big systemic projects, not the doormat projects, but the ones that are
Mhm.
systemically viable and really hurting other people as well. And we'll see an improvement in either you've got to be able to count this, right? So that's one thing I forgot to talk about on the third rail is make sure your results are countable.
Mhm.
Revenue, profit, productivity, quality, customer satisfaction, retention, whatever it is, if you can't count it, it doesn't count in this case. So make
Mhm.
sure it's not a feel-good play. Make sure it's got strong economic background before you go stepping on or close to that third rail.
I love it. I feel like this whole conversation has been just one really rallying call, like a huge pep rally to like go forth and go conquer. And I love it. It feels like it gives me the courage. Going back to my Super Mario Brother character, I feel like it's the mushroom that makes him big, or whatever the star, so he can just start running through and bulldozing all of those obstacles. I love it.
Oh, that's a great
So
analogy. Love that.
well, in thinking of everything that you've shared, I love to flip our brains a little bit and think about the opposite. What is one poor decision that you would warn our leaders to avoid? Like, don't do this one thing. Come on, you're better than that.
The biggest don't do is don't go this alone.
Mm,
No one wins alone. And we feel so isolated as leaders sometimes, right? And we don't want to admit our weaknesses. We don't want to, very often, do you seek new knowledge, right? In terms of your just whatever you get because you're so busy and burnt out by the end of the day. And so, when you look at the best pro athletes, when you look at the most successful business people, when you look at all of these things, like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I had the tremendous, fortune of having amazing mentors. Like I didn't
hmm
figure this all out on my own. Right? I had people in my corner, telling me to go left, not right, do this, not that. So whether it's a mentor, whether it's a coach, whether it's an advisor, I used to have a little advisory board with a bunch of people that were around my level of leadership. We'd all go out for martinis once a month and solve all the world's problems, right? And so it doesn't have to be paid for, although if you do, make sure you come to CWC. But there's so much support out there, but we get stuck in our head and we don't do what we need to do. And one of the
hmm
biggest themes of the book, which I'll leave your audience with, is we talk about becoming the CEO of You Incorporated.
Oh,
And
nice.
when you take on that CEO mindset of your career, of your life, now all of a sudden you start to show up and act differently. And so if you think about all the different things a CEO can do, and you apply that to you, one of the biggest things they do is they seek and share wisdom. And so, share what you know. I know people hide, they hide it because they're afraid that their friend of me at work is going to steal their great idea, or they don't want to go out and get some information because they're afraid to say they don't know. But all of this is a community. And so, whatever you do, do not do this alone.
I love it. And earlier I heard you say ecosystem, and that's really what it is. You're constantly connected to other people, other departments, and I love that. I love that visual. All right, so Tammy, where can our listeners go to learn more about you, your work, and where can they go get the book "Escaping the Career Trap"?
Okay. So if you're interested in working with one of our coaches or myself, hit careerwinnerscircle.com. You get a free strategy consultation. So one of our coaches really walks through where you are, what your goals are, and what you can do with or without us, right? So it's not a sleazy sales pressure thing. So if you're interested in more about what we do to help leaders and businesses grow, because we work with, leadership development, both from a corporate and from an individual perspective, we got you covered right there. I also do keynote speeches and workshops and stuff like that. So all of that stuff and the book you can find at escapingthecareertrap.com. But the other thing, Bethany, I'm going to ask our listeners to do is to connect with me on LinkedIn. And don't just connect, but actually say, hey, I heard you on the podcast. And I love that because then I get to talk to you and get to meet you and get to know what you think. And so please reach out, connect, start a conversation, and let's get to know each other a little bit better.
That is awesome. Well, Tammy, thank you so much for being here. You are just so full of wisdom, and I love your story. And I do hope they turn it into a movie, but it is so inspiring for all of us that can feel stuck. And just thank you for everything that you're doing to grow our leadership.
Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I knew it would be. I just love what you're doing on this platform and how you're serving your community. So thanks again for the invite.
Thank you. All right, guys, until next time, continue putting in the work of building your life and leadership on the rocks, the essential rocks. God bless. Remember, the most essential rock you can build your life and leadership on is the rock of Jesus Christ. Today's Bible verse comes from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1a through 2b. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Hey, it's Bethany again. If you're enjoying the Leadership on the Rocks podcast, be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss a single episode. Also, be sure to rate the show. We hope to earn 5 stars in serving you in leadership, and through your ratings, it'll help us get the word out about what we do here at Leadership on the Rocks. If you feel this podcast is helpful, be sure to share it with your friends, family, and coworkers, or anyone who wants to grow in leadership, but also have harmony between their work and home life. Thanks, and I'll see you again in the next episode.